Hi everyone, my name is Phil Slade. It's great to see you all here and be with you virtually at Activate. I'm very excited to deliver and talk about what we're going to talk about in the next 15 minutes or so. Um, Probably the biggest thing to note is that I'm a psychologist who has come at artificial intelligence and data from psychology. I don't come from the viewing AI and data from a programming point of view or a data point of view. I love data, I love statistics, and I love data. But that changes the way that I often look at statistics and data, and how I look at data as a means to an end. So when I talk to a lot of IT departments, they've got a lot of great data. They've got a lot of improving quality data. But they just don't know what to use it. They don't know how to use it effectively, and they don't really know why they're needing to use it. They don't have a particular behavioral outcome that they're trying to drive. So, and what I found is that unless you have an understanding of how humans work, the data that you collect both gets undermined in terms of the quality of the data you're collecting, and also the application of that data, even if it is good quality, tends to fall a little bit short. So this is what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at how we can better collect data and better use data to align with the way that the brain actually works. So let's jump into it. We're going to start having a look at different ways that we're thinking. So we're going to look at the social human and the thinking human. We're going to have a look at how trust plays a really important role in how data is then used and manipulated and perceived by the users, and then leveraging our humanness for more influence. So the basic problem, I believe, comes down to not just computers, but the way that people think almost like computers, that go into technology and IT, and they sort of just see data as points on a map, points on a page. They're users, right? Different users sometimes in the more advanced systems get differentiated. So that this might be two people, and so you might have a husband and a wife in this little data set, and they might have different preferences that align or don't align. Or maybe this is two companies where you're pulling apart different types of data. And so you get a segmented piece of data, but there's still essentially data points on a page of which somebody then has to make sense of. The problem with this is that this isn't the way that humans work, because humans take all of this data, but they arrange it in social hierarchies, right? So it doesn't matter if it's the official hierarchy or the chain of command in an organization, or if it's the unofficial hierarchies. Like in a family, you'll have brothers and sisters that sort of, there's a little bit of a hierarchy that sort of gets created within companies and within teams. Even at the same level, there's a little bit of a hierarchy that gets created, right? And the interesting thing about this is we keep all this information in our head, and it's vital for us to understand this in order to know how we change behavior. So a lot of us don't want to like the strength of the group or the strength of the ideal or the value, and if we undermine that, we short circuit our behavioral system. The interesting thing about hierarchies is that there is this little what we call circle of trust in a good hierarchy. In a well-functioning hierarchy, the levels have between each level. So when you're only one level apart, so the person that you're looking up to and below with, you have a circle of trust, a 360-degree circle of trust with that circle. And that's really important. That's not something that a lot of the data can see, particularly if it's an unofficial hierarchy. You could put a company structure in there, but we all know that's not really how it works. And you even see on this diagram here, we've got a couple of outliers, people that sort of float outside the data structures, and that's okay. We can sort of figure out how they kind of work. So this is how humans see users or humans, and this is really important, but it's only half the story, because we then need to figure out how we think individually as humans, because we need to know how this affects our own behavior. And so this is where behavioral economics comes in, and the neuroscience of decision making. So most of my career as a psychologist, I've worked as a behavioral economist, looking at the data and trying to use data to better help nudge people to certain behaviors and actions to varying levels of success. But what we've found in behavioral economics is this key idea of system 1 and system 2. So system 1 is very much linked to your amygdala and your long-term memories and those things. So the amygdala is your fight or flight response, that little nut that sits inside your head and produces a lot of the chemicals that we then talk about as emotions that then change behavior. The strongest one being fear. That if we fear something, we're likely to avoid that fear or look the group or run to safety. And our long-term memories in our hippocampus and our brainstem and all those sorts of things, so you've got your emotional center and your long-term memory or your traumas or your experience. If you've been in a job for a very long time, you don't have to think about it because a lot of those actions are in your subconscious. They're in this system 1. And this system 1 is then balanced by system 2. As humans, we get the frontal lobes, we get the stuff around the top. It's our ability to inhibit, our ability to plan, our ability to look into the future. System 1 reacts, it's very reactive. System 2 is a lot more responsive, and it responds to things in the environment, reacting and responding. System 1 is fast and intuitive. It's there to help us survive. If a lion walks into the room, we're not going to think too much about it. We're going to get out of there, right? So it survives. So it works for us. But system 2 is where we actually think and we use in our workspace a lot of time to solve problems and novel problems and plan and strategize. And we want our teams to be working in this system 2. We want the energy that we get out of system 1 and automatic behaviors and feeling good, but we want them to be thinking in the system 2. Now, system 1 is the first system that gets created in the womb. And it's also the system that evolutionarily got created first, we think. So that's why I kind of see system 1 as the ape. I also call it the ape because we can actually see these parts of the brain in the chimpanzee. It's like we've got an ape brain in our brains, quite literally. And we all know that the idea that when the ape loses, in the jungle and it goes crazy, it has no inhibition. But that's what we have as humans, right? As humans, we've got us to have inhibitions. It's kind of like we cage the ape. And so this cage is what makes us good. But our behaviors are largely driven by this system 1. And so if you now think of social hierarchies and you see those circles of trust, and you think about this ape as being triggered or, when under threat, it often comes out. When we violate these trust circles, so when you go from, when you jump a level, all sorts of things start to happen. So the red box on the left here or the right, that's an example of somebody sort of going over and above, leadership or the hierarchy or something like that to do something that somehow offends a bit of a trust circle. And what happens? Apes come out. So all of a sudden you get micromanagement behavior. So maybe it's the leader breaking the trust circle with the manager that's now trying to micromanage the users underneath. It could be the user trying to play politics and jump around the organization or to get ahead. You've then got colleagues that are seeing other people not offending trust circles, and then all of a sudden you've got a political mess because you've got people that are offending these trust circles. The problem that we've got is that the data that we collect, the one thing that we often do is just shoot that data straight up to those levels above, and so we're breaking trust circles by sharing data, because the way that they share data in the trust circle is different. So for instance, if we're doing an engagement survey and the people on the front line know that the people 2 or 3 levels above them are going to be able to see that data, it's no longer an accurate reflection of what they're actually feeling. It's a communication tool. Okay, so they're just trying to communicate. And that's a good thing about engagement surveys, is that they can communicate in a slightly more balanced way. But understand, it's a communication tool. It's not actually how you're feeling, what's going on with you, and it's not a real accurate representation of what's going on. It's a way that data is often used and skewed and used in really maladaptive ways, because they make correlations or assessments from the data, not realizing that the quality of the data that's being reported in the very first instance, it's actually undermined because it breaks this trust circle. So what can we do about it? Well, I think the greatest example of a trust circle is in a school environment where you have a teacher and a student. So a teacher and a student have a trust circle. We built a Switch for Schools. So Switch for Schools captures well-being data. And you imagine well-being, health and well-being, and emotional data, and tries to build emotional intelligence in kids and students, and it's doing an amazing job. But the reason that it's doing an amazing job is because it doesn't violate the trust circle. So the trust circle is between the student and the student. This little loop to go in that place that is the classroom, particularly when they're in those younger years. Well, when we put the data back up to administration, so the principals or the head ofs or things like that, we aggregate it in a way that classes can't be gamified against each other. So we're not saying that one class got more anxiety, another class got more sadness. And some principals really want this data, because out of genuine concern, we want to know where we need to help them. But what their question should be is, well, our trust circle is with the teachers. So how do we help the teachers help the students better, not how do we then go around the teacher to then undermine what the teacher's doing in that classroom, right? So this is about trust circles. So at each level of the trust circle, we're actually designing the data that they see to A, not offend the trust circle, but B, to strengthen or make the trust circle that they are actually in more resilient and build more rapport. As a psychologist, I know that building rapport in this sort of well-being space is more important than any framework or anything that you're trying to do. So we're trying to build that circle of trust because it builds rapport. It builds it gets to the outcome. What's our outcome? We're trying to make sure that kids don't commit suicide, right? We're trying to avoid this epidemic and the mental health epidemic that sits around anxiety and depression. And we're trying to depathologize a lot of the emotions and the high emotions that have just been pathologized over the last 50 years to an extent where people are now scared of even talking about emotions because they're worried about what's going to be wrong. So this is how the circle of trust really, really works. Now, if you get this right and you start to test and learn and you figure out ways that you can represent and collect the data, because you imagine here the students, once they realize that it's just going to the teacher and back, they're much more honest, they're much more available to being able to give that data to those teachers because they know that it's not going to escalate, and if I say that I'm really sad and all of a sudden I'm on suicide watch and I'd rather just say I'm fine because it's too much. So you don't want that because that's evidence of a broken trust cycle, right? So what can we do about this? Well, once we've got this, and these are screenshots of our actual Switch for Schools program, we can now nudge, not just directly, because often when they talk about nudging, it's kind of like, hey, do we send text message or push notifications to the end user? But if we understand the social dynamics, we don't have to push to the end user. We can push to someone else in that social hierarchy in order to then further nudge the student. So we can do this with a teacher. So it's getting data, and we'll show you one of those ways that we do that in a minute. Or we can do it with a student. So a lot of, for instance, usage. So we try to get teachers and principals to habit stack this and create habits around students. So because we're creating habitual stacking within students, the students start to then monitor and push the use of the app to the teachers because usage is what's important, not just the insight from our perspective. And so we're actually using the habitual stacking and some feel-good nudges in the students, or in order to nudge the teacher to actually use more. And obviously we do both. So you try to find ways to be able to get the right behavioral outcome using that trust circle. So you can actually, the data that's sitting there and is salient to people is the way that it then can get used. And this is both in the collection phase and in the use phase. Let's just very quickly have a look at what that looks like. So in the collection, for instance, we don't just say, how are you feeling? We use emotion wheels and we don't represent it like this. This is just one screen because we've got a limited amount of time here. So I won't go into how we present it to them. And there is a logic behind that. But essentially what we're doing here is we ask them first a question about how tired are you? So tiredness gets out of the question. Tiredness, not an emotion. And then we go, how are you feeling? And they have to pick one of these 6 categories. And then as soon as they pick one of these 6 categories, it goes into how intense is your feeling. So even in the data collection, we're nudging them towards not just saying fine. Fine's not on this. They can't say fine. They can't say bored. They can't say tired, right? But also they're starting to think intuitively about intensity level. And the idea of this circle is that the closer that you are to the center of this circle, the higher the activation is. And we're instantly giving them language that sits around activation. So there's a difference between being concerned and being overwhelmed. And it starts to depathologize it, right? It's okay to be concerned. I need to be a little bit annoyed or concerned in order to get the curiosity to learn. That's just me. If I'm in peaceful all the time, I don't learn. So this is understanding that. And the teachers then, when they get this data, when we first represented this data, they were just how many angry kids we got, how many scared kids, but it didn't tell them how scared or how angry. And so when we represent this data to the teachers back, we now have data users that are colored, and the strengths of their color is their strength of their tiredness. But where they sit on this wheel, it's no longer about how angry, sad, or scared they are. It's about how close they are to the center. So if we got one user that's scared there, and they are closer to their higher activation, that's something that we need to look at. Not the fact that they're scared, or we've got a few angry kids here, but there's actually only one or two that are actually approaching what would need to be some sort of question or have a look at. So it gives you intuitively a better way to look at and use the data, and respects the structure, because only the teacher gets to see this, or the people that the teacher says is part of that trust circle, a support worker, a chaplain, whatever it might be. So this is what we do. So I always say to people, articulate the behavior, build the models that understand and leverage the social hierarchies, and then use the data to nudge the individual apes, because apes are the ones that drive behavior. And so you're using the data in a way that respects the social structures that we sit within, as well as the way that our brain actually sees and understands behavior. So thanks for listening. It's a really quick 15 minutes. I hope something that I said really activated your own curiosity and want to ask some questions, but it's been a real privilege to be able to spend 15 minutes with you at Activate. We'll talk soon.